Hi all. We're having a Q&A kind of informal chat with Carl Tennenbaum, who is a candidate that we've endorsed for running for sheriff this year. And my name is Amy Nightcamp. I am the current president of the Sonoma County Now chapter. And we're delighted to have you, Carl. It's great to get to know you more. And so we have two of my fellow board members. We've got Elaine Holtz. Everybody knows her for being the past president and also our current treasurer. And Eileen Bill, who served on our board until last year. So the four of us can have a really nice discussion, and if anybody else comes in, that's great. So Carl, I wanted to have you start. Oh, and this is Ken. And
Hi.
Ken is
Hey,
Elaine's
Ken.
partner. And I'd like to start with you're wanting to make a lot of changes to the sheriff's office, and what would be the top 3 actions that you would want to take first?
Well, first of all, I want to say hi to everybody, and I want to thank you very much for having me here and for supporting me and endorsing me. It means a lot, and it's really helped to get this campaign. The momentum right now is really good, and I'm feeling very strong. So I want to thank you all for that. The 3 priorities are this. The cornerstone of my campaign, and the reason that I got involved, and the reason I decided to run, is the lack of transparency and accountability with the sheriff's office. The sheriff has a history of abuse that's resulted in a lot of injuries and deaths, excessive payouts by the county, millions of dollars, and also extremely exorbitant insurance rates that keep climbing because of that. So the resistance to transparency and accountability, and more than that, oversight. IALERO is the oversight body that was created as a result of Andy Lopez's killing. And they've never had any real effective power because of resistance from the sheriff and the sheriff's office. So my number 1 priority is changing the whole system, embracing and implementing the tenets of Measure P, which increase the strength of IALERO. And my plan for doing that is revising the way the complaint process is done, so it doesn't go directly to the sheriff, and giving IALERO more power and more oversight. And the parts of IALERO that are being litigated by the Sheriff's Association, Deputy Sheriff's Association, will become part of the policy, the sheriff's policy. So it will not have to be litigated or legislated. It's meet and confer is the sticking point right now. So that's my number 1 priority is to make the sheriff's office more accountability and embracing oversight. Number 2 is to increase staffing, to bring staffing up to adequate levels to where we have sufficient detention deputies in the jails. So we're not forcing overtime. We're not increasing the likelihood of bad outcomes with encounters with the people that are detained. And also part of the increasing the staffing is to improve recruiting and diversifying the workforce, and diversifying so that it's more reflective of the community. Right now, the sheriff's deputies, especially the sworn patrol officers, are primarily straight white males, and they don't reflect the community, and that doesn't help build the trust that has been eroded. And the trust that's eroded because of the killing of Andy Lopez and the killing of David Ward and the other cases that I've cited. So it's really doing an aggressive outreach and finding out why we're not hiring a sufficient reflective members of the community, and changing the hiring and training policies and standards. And then the third one, and these are not in specific order, but the big one that we have to deal with is the jails. People think of the sheriff's office, and we think of these the highly publicized cases, the ones I just cited, but the jail, the county jail right now is it's a disaster. And I've talked to former deputies who've worked there, and they talk about the working conditions there. They're extremely understaffed, not only detention deputies, but they don't have sufficient healthcare professionals there to adequately treat the people that are taken into custody. So my first step, day 1, is to conduct an independent management audit of the jail, find out what the problems are there, and is to address those problems specifically to ensure that every person who's taken into custody in Sonoma County is treated with respect and dignity, and also that there aren't abuses. The jail also has a history of abuse with $1 million payouts because of some of the stuff that's going on there. The most celebrated one is the yard counseling incident, but in the past year and a half alone, we've had 4 people die in the county jail, and that reflects very poorly on the county of Sonoma and the sheriff's office.
Now, when you talk about the jails and treating the prisoners respectfully, how would you handle, I mean, COVID is ongoing and it sweeps through jails and prisons. And is there anything that you would do to make that a better environment for them, a safer environment?
I think, again, it goes to having sufficient healthcare staff and healthcare workers. Right now, the sheriff's office contracts out with WellPath. There have been some issues with the contract there and with the staffing. So to make sure that there's sufficient staffing, but also the safeguards, I recently saw where the masks that they use are of the really poor standard. They won't use masks that have the little nose bridge things because the metal things there. This is really weird, but it's the kind of the mindset, and I understand that there's a safety issue there, but they don't want the detainees to take those metal pieces out and use them for some unknown reason. So it's looking at what are common sense approaches to healthcare. I mean, we've all gone through the pandemic together. We've all been exposed to the different, whether it's a mask mandate or vaccines or whatever. And that's the other thing, making sure that vaccinations are available to people that are detained, and also looking at, whether see what percentage of the staff of the jail, whether it's the detention deputies or healthcare workers, are vaccinated, and looking closely at that. I know that we had a lieutenant from the sheriff's office pass away last year. My understanding that he wasn't vaccinated. So just taking really extreme safeguards to make sure that people are protected, and also looking at when COVID struck, we reduced the amount of people that were incarcerated because we were going to extreme measures, seeing if maybe we need to look at who's being incarcerated, why, what the circumstances are, and trying to reduce the overall jail population. And that goes even beyond the COVID situation, to just look at why we have so many people in custody and what the reason is for that.
Great, thank you, Carl. So one of the things that has been on my mind is how you, as the sheriff, would be able to handle crises that are occurring in our county, such as homelessness, such as drug overdoses. We've got a lot of people who come into the library who have mental health issues as a result of being homeless or having drug problems. And there's nowhere for them to go but prison. I mean, they get picked up so that they can spend a night and be at least off the streets for that night. So there's a lot of incidents where they have to act out to be taken away so they can get off the streets for that day. Is there something that you as sheriff would do to make life better for them?
Yeah, Amy, the issue, the problem that we have in the country, and the problem we have with the criminal justice system, is that it's just become the sort of the default go-to source of the solution for everything. And even though it's not really a solution, it's just sort of the Band-Aid. And statistically, we've determined, nonprofit that I work with and other criminal justice reform organizations have determined that about 60% of all calls to 911 could be handled by a lot of other entities. The big issue that we're looking at right now, that you've just touched on, is mental health. People in mental health crisis and mental health issues. And right now, the county jail is the largest provider of mental health care in the county. That makes absolutely no sense at all. And you're right, for somebody to be having, whether it's a manic episode or they're in a depression crisis or whatever, to be taken into custody and incarcerated for something that's really not a crime, but we can attach a crime to it and use that as justification to detain them. So finding alternatives and working with the other elected representatives, our county health director, and all the interested parties, the homeless outreach network, which is huge in Sonoma County, to come up with alternatives that preclude law enforcement being the first responders for these things, and also to preclude law enforcement from being the long-term solution or even the short-term solution. So working collaboratively to find other, mental health care and mental outreach, healthcare outreach. We have a program that just launched in Santa Rosa, in response. We have the SAFE program that's in Petaluma and Cotati and Roanoke Park. Those are first responders that are mental health care professionals. So finding solutions like that. The same thing with substance use. We have a problem with drug addiction in the country. We have a problem with drug addiction in Sonoma County, and now we've compounded with a fentanyl crisis. The war on drugs has not been successful. We spent trillions of dollars. I was a narcotics officer in the 80s, and the situation has gotten worse. So we keep doing the same thing with the same results. So it's finding alternatives, and getting into the real, I say they're extreme. They're not extreme. It's just that people are conditioned to think that this is the solution. Let's keep locking them up. But, we talk about some communities are doing safe injection sites or supervised injection sites, I should say, or needle exchange programs, to where we're just not criminalizing social issues. These are social problems that need some creative or outside of the traditional way of doing it. So again, it's how working with, and these changes would be incremental, but working with the other elected officials and the other appointed officials to come up with other solutions that don't involve incarceration.
Which actually brings me to education of the sheriff's office, of police officers who are coming out of academy in a very academic environment and may not be really learning what's happening on the streets in real life, or how to handle with compassion some of the things that they are dealing with. And how do you plan to provide professional development for these officers so that we don't keep running into the same problems with people being shot for no reason, for instance, or people having violence that is coming up that shouldn't be there in the first place?
It starts, I alluded to, we talked about my top 3 priorities. I talked about staffing, and I touched on recruiting. It starts with who we hire. And there's this traditional model. It's the paramilitary structure of law enforcement that has just been in place for as long as, I can remember. When I came through the police academy 40 years ago, and to this very minute, they recruit to that standard. There's a certain test that you have to go through to get hired. And although they have some practical application, they're just very limited in their scope. And then once a person's hired, the training is basically mandated by the state, but they're called learning domains and perishable skills. And they're these it's less academic than it is sort of vocational. And that's where the problem starts. It starts in the police academy, not only with the emphasis on force, the emphasis on, the use of force, but also it's fear-based training. And that's the unfortunate thing, is that they take people, youngsters who don't have a lot of life experience, and they expose them to this training that's very fear-based, that, everybody is a potential assailant, people are all perceived as the enemy. And it starts to really build, the us versus them model that does not benefit anybody. And I had the good fortune of growing up in a city that's very condensed and dense, and I ran the streets, as a teenager. So I had a lot of life experience when I joined the police department. So that benefited me, and that's where I got to see where the flaws with their training are. Even as a recruit, I saw it. So it's sort of de-emphasizing the fear-based training, reducing, or at least balancing the use of force with more common sense, practical. They don't teach human psychology in the police academy. They don't teach empathy in the police academy. There's very little emphasis on constitutional law in the police academy. And yet these are the cornerstones of our society and the foundation that we build on. If we want better law enforcement officers out there, we have to really work on that. And we use the word training, and I get stuck on the semantics of the training versus the teaching, because we don't teach these skills. So what I've identified is the post is the state agency that regulates training, and they have minimum standards for training and what's required. However, there's no limit to what we can add to that. And if it means increasing the duration of the academy or adding classes afterwards, to where, people that are hired go on to further training. And it's also getting them outside of that academy environment too, into the JC or into Sonoma State, to where there's incentives for deputies to be more worldly and more compassionate and less focused. Like I said, fear-based training and use of force are always going to be the default, and we have to sort of work away from that.
Thank you, Carl. That's really clear. And I'm very happy to hear from you that more education and more work in that area I think that'll really help and also I think having them get out into the community more and meet the people that are working with them. Yes, Elaine, go ahead.
You're muted, Elaine.
The question I have is because you got into training, and in light of what is going on in the world today, with the student shootings and everything, what type of training do you believe that the sheriff department should not only just give its deputies, but how should it expand it out to the community to help us make safer schools? I mean, is there any plan or any thought that you have around that in relation to training?
Elaine, I want to say it's a good question. It's also a loaded question because, I've been asked repeatedly over the last couple of weeks to address these horrific shootings. And it's just, I'm the eternal optimist, but I just feel like we're just so overwhelming, the amount of guns in this country. It's shameful that we're exposed to. I heard a statistic, I haven't confirmed it, but somewhere I read the other day that there's 400 million guns in this country. That's more guns than people. And we've got this, part of our society that fetishizes the ownership of guns. And until we get a handle on that, some common sense gun laws, just, something as sensible as universal background checks. But now we're getting way into the deep part of it. As far as training the deputies goes, after Columbine, I was a police officer. I was working in the city. As soon as, the aftermath of Columbine is we all took what's called active shooter training. And it's sad that we have to do it, but as a trained law enforcement professional, it's necessary that we learn how to engage in situations like that. And it's not, obviously the schools are the big ones because of the children, but in San Francisco, 101 California was the one that we had. There were 9 or 10 people. This is going back 30 years ago. So this has been a constant because of the proliferation of guns and also the mental health issues that we've touched on too. So it's just, there's your recipe for disaster. As the sheriff, I think my goal would be, number one, to just really try to get a handle on what the gun usage, gun possession, and the potential for gun violence is, and to try to address that on the front end. As far as the schools go, it's to just keep to have the active shooter training for the deputies in the event that we have a critical incident that involves a shooting. And then also to just reach out to the schools to try to educate and inform, the staff and the students what safe precautions are. It troubles me to have to talk about doing, active shooter skills and drills for students, but that's a reality. I'm not a big believer in staffing schools with uniformed officers. That's proven to not really be effective. Not only what we saw in Uvalde, but just when you have police officers in school, we're getting back to they become the default go-to source. So schools that have cops in them end up arresting and incarcerating more students and students of color for petty violations than they do preventing shootings. So that's not necessarily the answer. It's more education and information and outreach, and also just having really well-trained deputies to know how to respond effectively. And I just, what happened in Texas troubles me, and what we're hearing about what the police did down there troubles me. That's unacceptable. police officers and deputies, law enforcement has a job to do. And when I took the oath, just like every deputy up here, they took the oath knowing that they may have to risk their life to save other people. And unfortunately, that rationale has been used to unfortunately kill people that shouldn't have been killed. And, we know up in Sonoma County too well what's happened. So it's educating. But again, we need to work locally to address the national issue of the guns and just common sense gun laws.
Good question, and thank you for that very comprehensive answer. Now, I understand your motto is that you're running under is listen, respect, and protect, which sounds good on paper, but what actually does that mean?
It does sound good on paper, and it's funny because when I assembled my campaign team, one of my campaign we call him a super connector. Danny Martinez is the one that coined that phrase, and it's interesting because he didn't know me that well. But what it does mean, and first of all, I'm going to give you props for saying it sounds good on paper. It all sounds good on paper, doesn't it? We talked yesterday about the sheriff's motto or the peace officer's oath and all that. These are words on paper. The reality is that I like to talk, but I also like to listen. And as a police officer, I learned early on that when people call 911 or when people, flag down a police officer, people just want to be heard. Everybody needs to have a voice and to be listened to. And it doesn't matter, where you come from, what your background is. We all deserve to be heard. It's basic communication in our families and within our social circles. And as I've been campaigning, I've covered as much of Sonoma County as I can, and I've heard from all the different communities, and they all have different wants and different needs. So it's listening to them and hearing them and what they have to say. And listening is part of it, but it's also hearing what's being said. So really knowing that and then respecting everybody's opinion. I think I could be, if you had to put me in a box, I'm more progressive minded. I'm a Democrat, but that doesn't mean that the conservative bloc and people that are not of the same stripe. I mean, it's respecting what they're saying and hearing them. And then also as the sheriff, I get elected by the simple majority. 50% plus one vote gets me elected, but that means there's 49% of the people, if that were the breakdown, that didn't vote for me, but they still need to be listened to and respected and protected. I would be the sheriff for everybody. And it's a matter of public safety is always going to be the cornerstone of my office and how we put that out there. So it's protecting everybody's rights to living, a safe and happy life. And that's what that means. And that's how I operated as a police officer, really respecting the people that I arrested. I still respected them because they were human beings and they deserve human dignity. And we all make mistakes, and some people act out of desperation, and committing a crime does not mean that you're a bad person or that you should be treated any differently than the person who didn't commit a crime.
Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to have Carl address at this point? Yes, Elaine, and then Eileen.
Oh, real quickly, we hear all these wonderful things, but I'd like to have personal information on you. Like, are you married? Do you have children? What is, who is Carl? I mean, and that's interesting because in all the different scenarios, I found that nobody was really talking about who they are personally. So I would like to know just a little bit more about you.
Well, Elaine, you haven't been to enough forums, because after all these forums, we always start off with our elevator pitch. And I can tell you that, we do our little background. I say we because it's Dave and Eddie and I know more about those two guys than I ever thought I would know about my opponents. So what you need to know about me, I always start off by saying I was born and raised in San Francisco. I'm absolutely passionate about the city. Northern California is just such a wonderful place to be. I'm happy. I love Sonoma County, but I will always, like Tony Bennett, I left my heart in San Francisco. It's a wonderful city. It's diverse, it's beautiful. And it really imbued me with my progressive outlook and my, embracing all the different cultures. So, that's the cornerstone of who I am. I was the second of 6 kids. My dad was a Greyhound bus driver. He's a Marine Corps veteran. My dad actually was a Purple Heart recipient, Korean War. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, which sounds, stay-at-home mom. There's 6 of us, and my mom, my mom struggled. But growing up in San Francisco and just loved life there. Before I was a cop, I was a paramedic. I worked city ambulances for 2 years, and then I was a police officer. But my personal life is one that I'm married. My wife Angela, who's a native of Santa Rosa. Angela grew up in the Roseland area, and we've been together for 15 years. And I am fortunate enough to be married to the most wonderful woman in the whole wide world. She just absolutely means everything to me. And if she were here right now, she's amazing. And we just get along, we're like peanut butter and jelly. We just do so well together. A lot of fun around my house. We laugh a lot. And it's just her and I. We don't have kids together. I have 2 children from a previous marriage. My daughter Lisa is on my campaign staff. She's an attorney who lives in New Orleans. And my son Douglas took after me. He's a police officer in San Francisco, and they're both great kids, both very different. My daughter's really more progressive and outspoken than her father is, and she's got the law degree to back it up. And my son's a really good cop, and he's very community oriented, just like his dad was as a cop. And so that's my family life in a nutshell. Moving from the city that I love to Sebastopol. I've got 3.5 acres of beautiful country property. I've got a view to die for. I can look out my window and see Mount St. Helena and Sonoma Mountain and the Great Casino from West County. And then the other thing you need to know about me is I'm a diehard Giants fan, born and raised in San Francisco, absolute nuts about the Giants, live and breathe with them. And I'm the goofiest dog person you'll ever meet. I've got 3 rescues. You probably saw Duke coming in and out, but I'm on the campaign trail. That is if dogs could vote, I'd win in a landslide, because I cannot walk by a dog without saying hi. It's like I've never seen a dog before. So, and then the other things you need to know, New York Times crossword puzzle addict. And I love to cook, and my signature dish is a Caesar salad. I make a very well-renowned Caesar salad from scratch. And there you have it, Elaine. you got the thumbnail Carl T's biography.
Eileen, you're next.
Okay. So let's say that you are elected sheriff. My concern is that you might get backlash from the current staff. I'm just wondering how you perceive it might be and how you would deal with it.
Eileen, that's a good question. I have no doubt that you're right about that. There's a couple of things I can talk to. When I was working in the city, it was just a traditional model. Was the next chief was somebody who came up through the ranks and came from within. And during my career, we had 2 or 3 outsider chiefs, and we always resisted because it was always a he, wasn't one of us. It wasn't one of us. He didn't come up. He's not part of our family. And we resisted it. We would complain about it. We would squawk about it. But at least for me personally, and most of the officers I work with, we still went out and did our job. We still went out. We were paid professionals. We have a job to do. I became a cop to protect and serve. That's the LA motto, but I really did. I became a cop to serve my community. And it doesn't matter who the chief is, at least for me, I still did my job. I think that the sheriff's office, the deputy sheriffs, and not the association, that's a different deal. Most of the individuals that are working for the sheriff's office realize that they're paid professionals. I think that as much as they might resist me being an outsider, they respect the fact that I was a cop for 32 years, that I was a street cop for the majority of my life. And I think there's a little bit of respect that comes from that. I think the resistance is going to be more for the Deputy Sheriff's Association. I talked earlier about fear-based training, and it's so funny because we apply that to the streets, but it's also, I look at these deputies and I know the resistance to oversight. And my question is, what are you afraid of? What's your fear? So my number one, acknowledging that that's going to happen. There's going to be resistance, hoping that they'll be the professionals that they're paid to be, and also reaching out and meeting with them. I really, and it may sound like a pie in the sky goal. Number one, meeting with the Deputy Sheriff's Association, sitting down with them when I have to, but I want to anyway, to let them to get to know me and to know that I'm not in there nobody's job's going to be impacted except for the better. To get them to understand that. And then also in the first year, I really want to meet with every single deputy, every single employee that works in the sheriff's office, so they can meet me and I can meet them, and they'll get to know that there's a lot, there's nothing but good stuff coming for them. There's no, like I said, nobody's gonna lose their job, but it's just trying to win them over and knowing that if they're gonna resist, if they're going to try to obstruct or interfere with what we're trying to do, because it's not just me, it's the community. What we're trying to do in the sheriff's office to make it a better sheriff's office, if they actively interfere with that, then there will be consequences. You know, the funny thing about me is people get that I'm genuinely a nice guy. I was genuinely a nice cop too. But when it's time to go to work, when it's time to answer the bell, the work has to be done. And sometimes you, like Tina Turner said, sometimes you got to play rough, and the deputies will know that, you know, I genuinely have their best interests at heart. But if there is, if the DSA tries to obstruct what I'm doing, or if an individual deputy tries to obstruct what I'm doing, just like if there's an individual deputy that's, you know, has bias or animosity or hatred or belongs to a hate group, there's going to be consequences, and they will be swift and they will be severe. And I say that wholeheartedly. And again, this is come from the nicest guy in the world, so it will be dealt with. So there you go.
Okay.
Good question, Eileen. Thanks. Ken.
Carl, you you have a lot of experience on the street. How do you think that you're going to face this big organization? And what are your organizational skills and be able to administer such a large agency?
Another good question, Ken, and another area that's been, I want to say an area of criticism, but when people critique me as a candidate, that's something that comes up. It's something that Dave and Eddie have both brought up repeatedly. There's a lot of different ways to answer that. Number one, I am smart enough to figure out, you know, how to manage by hiring and having the administrative staff to manage for me. Right now, a lot of being the sheriff is being a figurehead. It's not the only part of it, but it's being a figurehead. It's the person that the people of the community and the deputies will look to, managing the jails and managing the administration and managing the patrol force. There are assistant sheriffs. There are people that are already there that know the basic structure of it. What I've said to people before, that in the sheriff's office, we don't have a management problem right now. We don't. It's being managed just fine. Mark Essick is doing a great job managing the sheriff's office. He's a horrible leader. We have a leadership crisis. So the emphasis needs to be shifted away from management, because that's a really good point. And you're right. My management experience is very minimal. I did work in the chief's office for 2 years. I was an administrative assistant to the chief. So I know administration from the inside. I worked on policy. I'm very strong on policy. It's something that I want to look at, but I also give myself credit for being smart enough to figure out and know my limitations and finding the talent and knowing the people that are there. The Board of Supervisors controls a big part of the budget. That's the other discussion. Well, I've never managed a budget of $210 million before. Well, neither have Dave Edmonds, and neither have Eddie Ingram. They haven't. And that money is already pretty much accounted for. So it's not like I walk in day one and have to figure out what to do with it. It's there. So having the talent, knowing that, and then my backhand to my two opponents is this. They both talk about their resumes and they both talk about what they've done. Eddie Ingram loves to talk about, oh, he's got this management experience and he's managed the budget of the jails. Eddie Ingram has been running the jails for a year and a half. 4 people have died there. In his management experience, it's like they're checking a box. Oh, I've done this and I've done that. There's nothing insightful. There's nothing creative about what they've done as managers. So I just feel that, you know, with the amount of my intelligence, my smarts, finding the talent, knowing that the county and the sheriff's office has talent there to help manage these different parts of the sheriff's office, it's very doable, and it's not anything that's gonna, you know, I'm not worried about it. I do see it as an area of criticism and also concern, but again, it's something that I think is very easy to take care of.
That's a great question. Elaine? You're on mute.
So-
You're on mute, Elaine.
Oh, okay. About 7 or 8 years ago, Ken and I were on the Mark West Chamber of Commerce. I was on their board of directors, and one of the mixers we had was at the sheriff's department, and I was totally shocked when they took us into the gun room. I mean, I could not believe, in fact, I think one of the, so I think it actually, it was Mr. Gelhaus was actually the person who was at the table, and they had AK-40, they had AK-15s, and he asked me to pick it up. And I tried to pick it up and I couldn't pick it up. He had to pick it up for me and put it in my hand. And that's when I first became aware, and of course, being friends with a lot of the progressives here in the community, and because we work so hard on the Andy Lopez situation, finding out that there was so much military gear in our own sheriff's department. And now we have, I think it's Proposition 81. I think they're trying to control something. I'm not really clear about that. But what is your take on? I mean, do you believe that as a sheriff department that we have to? I mean, it kind of scares me when I think that there's any kind of push to arm a sheriff department like a military. So, what is your view on that?
My view on that's very dim. I just think that we've engaged in this arms race with the public. The threat, again, I know there's danger out there. Being a police officer, being a sheriff, there's always a potential for that. This all started in the 90s under the Clinton administration, when there was they were closing the military bases, and they created this whole system where the excess military hardware could go to these departments, and it just became a runaway train. I honestly don't see, I think that we need to have, in different agencies call them different things, a very well-trained tactical squad or specialist squad, because like we talked about earlier, whether it's a school shooting, or a barricaded subject, you have to be prepared for that worst case scenario. But when you keep buying armaments, when you keep getting, these armored personnel carriers, these tanks that have absolutely no practical use in a civilized society, the sheriff's office it's my thing is community-based policing, and we should reflect the community and to trot out these arms. And in San Francisco, we started arming the patrol officers with AR-15s, and they're just, the reality is the more guns you have, the more shootings there are, and the more potential for some innocent person to get killed. I mean, people forget, we talk about Andy Lopez. There was one of the 8 rounds that were fired went into a house that was behind the shooting, into a kitchen. An innocent person could have been killed. So I am absolutely down on it. The assembly bill that you're talking about is just a regulatory bill as far as reporting what the stuff is. There's no restrictions or limitations. That comes down to the county board of supervisors, which I am a little disillusioned with the way they rubber stamp everything. But no, there's no need for so much of this stuff. I think that it's weaponry that has to really be, there has to be an articulated use for it. We saw the misuse during the George Floyd riots in Santa Rosa, when people were maimed because Santa Rosa was using these projectiles. We should not be using this against our citizenry. Not absolutely, especially if people are engaging in their First Amendment rights to protest. Property crimes are property crimes. They need to be dealt with. But we have people that are getting seriously injured and killed with some of this stuff. So no, and you're just talking about a gun. Some of these agencies, Petaluma's got a big anti-tank, I don't even know, it's crazy stuff that should not be. It's for the military. It's not for the police.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. A big part of the problem is that the police are being trained in military style fighting, and they use the same weaponry. And how can they possibly, with that environment, how can they possibly have an attitude of, oh, the community is a safe place to be? Instead, they see everybody as a potential enemy, and that's where we run into problems.
Yeah, and I know the circumstances are different, but as a police officer, I wore my uniform, and we had the gun belt. We wore our vests were underneath our shirts, and I basically, it's a really nice uniform. I took great pride in it, and I see deputies now, out in Guerneville and Russian River, and just they wear the vest on the outside, and with all of the the extra ammunition and the taser, it's really imposing, and it's a little threatening and off-putting. And I'm just you scratch your head and go, so what are you anticipating? And again, safety is always the key, but at some point you've gone so far. Just the appearance alone is, like I said, it's a little off-putting. And I see these deputies, and you're at Russian River, and yet the appearance is like you're in Fallujah. It just really is kind of, and so it's hard for people to even approach a deputy and engage them in a conversation when you just see this appearance. And so it starts on a granular level with the cop on the street, and then it goes up to the military vehicle. So I don't know that there's a simple solution or an answer, but I would just like the deputies to be able to stand down a little bit and know that we're not, we're not at war here. This is a community, Sonoma County, that we need to be. The deputies and the sheriff's office are part of the community. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the discussion. They really need to remember that they're part of the community. Again, the community, the county of Sonoma funds the sheriff's office to the tune of $210 million a year. The residents, the voters of Sonoma County vote for the sheriff. And we have an obligation to respect the community that we serve, and really to embrace that and be a part of it.
So the sheriff's office is in charge of the unincorporated areas, the town of Windsor and Sonoma itself. Those are very different communities. Have you got a plan for how to work with each one and the Board of Supervisors?
It's funny, it's kind of a tangled web, because this past weekend I was in Windsor for 3 days. The good news is it seems like the residents of Windsor are happy with the police department there. First of all, I have to tell you that it's a foreign concept to me of this contracting out. I mean, I get that's part of the agreement, because Windsor and Sonoma they don't feel that they can fund their own police department. They don't want to provide for their own police department. So again, it's listening to what now the feedback in Sonoma is a little bit different. And the primary complaint that I get in Sonoma is just staffing. That they don't feel that there's enough police officers there. So it's just working with those communities and knowing what their wants, their needs are. But right now, again, this past weekend, at least on the ground, people seem happy. And I also just happened to coincidentally, I met Mike Roush, who's the chief of police at Windsor. He's a sheriff's lieutenant who got the job, and he's an extremely nice guy. Seems, at least my takeaway, seems rather down to earth and progressive for somebody who's been in the sheriff's department for a long time. And so my sense is that things are fairly good in Windsor, and Sonoma, I just heard that they're just concerned with the lack of staffing. But it's just listening to what the community needs and what they want, and responding in kind. Staffing is always an issue that people are very concerned about, to make sure that when they call 911, that help is a reasonable, time away. So it would just be listening to the communities and what they need.
I don't have any more questions at this point. I mean, we've asked as much as I can think of. Eileen, Elaine, Ken, do you have any more?
I know that I greatly respect you, Carl, mostly because of your involvement with Measure P. So let me get to know your character that way, that you had your feet were on the ground with that. So anyway, I just appreciate your work for Measure P and vowing to uphold it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things, actually, when I think about this election, because of the struggle that people have gone through to bring it to where it is. And what was so interesting to me was during the election, when all of a sudden, when George Floyd unfortunately was killed that way, and suddenly Measure P was going on the ballot, all of a sudden we had everybody and his brother was endorsing it, when before we couldn't even get hardly anybody to endorse it. I mean, in fact, there was such an argument at the Board of Supervisors over the word oversight. They didn't want the oversight, and I could never understand it. I remember when I went and looked it up in the dictionary. Why don't they want oversight? We need oversight. So I think it's a very important issue, and I hope that people understand that. And I wish people would go on the website and read Measure P, what it entails, how important it is for our community. And 63% of the voters voted on it. I mean, we want change in this community. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ken. I just wanted to put my 2 cents in, because I was so involved myself. And a shout out to all the people who brought that measure forward, because it's an amazing gift to our county. And a lot of us don't understand that.
And I agree with you, and I thank you for that. And it's Measure P primarily is the reason that I'm here right now. I don't think that 4 years ago, pre-George Floyd, people really realized the issues. And it's really, it's the paradox for me is having been a cop and really loved my job, but I watched, obviously I've lived with myself my whole life, and I've seen my evolution. And even with Measure P, that's when I really learned a lot about the sheriff's office. And I just, I said early on when we first started, I'm stunned at the level of just the impunity that the sheriff, that they feel that they have, and they do have, and this resistance to any kind of oversight. And again, when I was a beat cop and I was a rookie, and through my early part of my career, I was part of the union and we resisted oversight. I was part of that faction. And then, as a human, I evolved, and we hope that we would all evolve to realize, okay, what are we hiding? What's the problem here? What are the issues? And again, law enforcement is the only occupation in the country where we have the power to just arbitrarily kill somebody, to take a life. So that's a lot. That's a big responsibility. And so we have to really, number one, as law enforcement professionals, we have to be very judicious about that. We have to be very thoughtful about it. And we also have to be responsible for those actions. And again, we just look, Sonoma County alone, forget about George Floyd. Andy Lopez and David Ward were two situations. There were two murders that should never have happened. And they were murders that were done with impunity. There was no consequences. So we've got to break down the system. We've got to break down with the training, like I said, the hiring. I look at those two respective deputies, and unfortunately they were the outliers, but they represent the rest of the good working deputies, the conscientious, thoughtful, critical thinkers that are out there that are doing the job like I did the job, with compassion. So we've got to, something's got to change. And I just know, for me, like I said, Measure P, I know 4 years ago I couldn't have done this, but after Measure P passed, like you said, Elaine, by 2/3, I just feel like people of Sonoma County really are ready for change, really, really are. And the most galling thing for me is to listen to both of my opponents talk about how they'll embrace it. I'm going, you did nothing. Not only did you do nothing, Eddie Ingram actively, was part of the obstruction of oversight, and Dave Edmonds was part of the bully culture. So, I just really, I hope that people understand that we really need change. It's 2022 in Sonoma County, and I've really tapped into this amazing progressive movement that I just feel has, people want change. And so, yeah, Measure P got me here. And I look back on, Barbara Grassetti was one who really helped me, as part of Measure P, and also as part of being a candidate that's really made that happen. So thank you for acknowledging that, and just knowing that that's the cornerstone of my campaign, is getting Measure P implemented, and also explaining to these deputies that there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to hide. If you're making mistakes, we're going to correct the mistakes. And if it involves, new policy, new training, or getting rid of bad deputies, that's what we'll do.
It's interesting you say that, because all of a sudden when I was thinking of us going in front of the Board of Supervisors, every time I went up there, I would start out with this one question with Andy Lopez: if this was your child, what would you expect your leaders to do? And I was stunned by the slowness of it, the resistance of it, but at the same time, 63% voted for Measure P. So when it came to the ballot, the people really came out, and I hope that people come out again at this time.
I do too.
So thank you so much for answering that, and for being a part of it, because they were successful. We got it passed.
Yeah, we did.
Which was amazing. I mean, people don't realize what a miracle it really was.
I agree. It was overwhelming. It was.
And God bless George Floyd.
Yeah.
Carl, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to stop the recording unless somebody else wants to wrap, up with a last minute question.
Where will the recording be available?
Well, the recording's going to be in the cloud, and as soon as it's ready, I will make sure it gets up on our YouTube channel, which we do have. And Carl, I'll send you the link to that. And then
Okay, if I can, then before we stop the recording, because I have to be the candidate.
Oh yes, please.
I have to tell everybody who's watching this. Number one, I always close with, this has been, I've lived an amazing life, and running for office, it can be taxing, it can be exhausting, it's gonna be frustrating. It's been the most rewarding thing I've ever done. It's just been amazing beyond my wildest dreams. And so for everybody that supported me, including everybody on this right now on this Zoom, I can't thank you enough. It's been, when I got into it, being a first-time candidate, I had this idea of being a grassroots campaign. And a grassroots campaign really involves boots on the ground. It involves the people that are out working every day, toiling and want change. So, a grassroots campaign is going to be, we need votes. More than anything, it's going to be a low turnout election, and every vote is going to count more than it ever has before. And what we just talked about is making the change. So my ask is for everybody that views this now and as it goes out into the ether, to vote for me, to tell all your friends and family to vote for me. And also you can go to my website, carltforsheriff.com. You can endorse me there. There's a donate button because we all know that money drives politics. So I have to ask for donations, and to just thank everybody from the bottom of my heart for everything you've done for me. This has been amazing. So thank you. And thank you, Amy, for doing this, and Elaine for your support, and Ken and Eileen. I really appreciate it.
I'd like to close. I'd like to say one quick thing. I want to thank our president, Amy, for coordinating this and bringing this down, and remind people that this was sponsored by the National Organization for Women, the Sonoma County chapter, to please look at our Facebook page, become a member, and above all, vote. And one last thing, if you're mail-in voting, take it to one of the drop-offs or bring it to the voter of registration. Don't wait on the last day to bring it to the voting poll, because they put it in there and then sometimes that vote is not counted for a week or two. So if you want your vote counted right away, make sure you get that ballot in before June the 7th.
And I turned in my ballot at the ballot box in front of the Roanoke Park Library. So go libraries. We have ballot
Yay!
boxes all over. All right, I'm turning off the recording now.
Okay.
Thank you, Carl.